new details on the investigation into the death of actor Gene Hackman.
Inside the secret tunnel buried beneath the estate of Gene Hackman, the air is freezing and the darkness total. Ancient stone walls drip with the scent of rust and earth, while the silence is broken only by the rhythmic echo of water deeper in the dark. Above in the mansion, federal investigators had already found 2 bodies amidst a ransacked library and an empty safe. They assumed they were processing the tragic end of a Hollywood legend until a hidden passage was discovered behind a false wall. No one, not the staff, neighbors, or police, knew this subterranean tunnel existed. This discovery fundamentally reframes the legacy of the celebrated actor, who apparently built his guarded life around keeping this secret buried. What investigators found at the bottom of those freezing stone steps was never meant for the modern world. What it reveals about who Gene Hackman really was and what he was desperately hiding from is a story that is only just beginning to be understood. At precisely 11 o'clock on the morning of February 26, 2025, a large convoy of federal and local law enforcement vehicles came barreling up to the reinforced steel gates buried deep within the thick, secluding forest on the outskirts of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Nestled quietly beyond those imposing gates was a $4 million, heavily secured compound, the intensely private, elaborately protected estate of 95-year-old Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his 65-year-old wife, Betsy Arakawa. For several days, the outside world had received absolutely nothing from either of them. Worried friends had their calls go completely unanswered. The domestic staff that normally reported for their daily routines had stopped showing up entirely. What remained was total, uninterrupted silence pouring out of a vast property that, under ordinary circumstances, ran with the precise, disciplined efficiency of a small military base. Here is the profoundly disturbing detail that slipped past everyone initially. It was a local handyman who ultimately sounded the alarm. Not a grieving family member, not a longtime companion, but a hired maintenance worker who urgently told responding sheriff's deputies that he was convinced the elderly couple had perished inside their own stronghold. Because the property sat in total lockdown, the massive steel gates had to be physically forced open. The heavy chains and padlocks were cut apart with industrial equipment, and that fact alone signaled to the seasoned agents on scene that something had gone profoundly, irreparably wrong inside. This was not the kind of casual residential property where someone might absent-mindedly leave a back door ajar. Every inch of this sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate had been deliberately engineered and heavily reinforced to remain permanently sealed, unless someone from within consciously chose to press a button and grant access. When officers finally breached the perimeter and stepped inside the main residence, they were steeling themselves for something tragic, yet fundamentally ordinary. They expected to discover an elderly, deeply secluded couple who had passed away quietly in their final days. What they actually encountered, however, was anything but ordinary. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were both found deceased inside the sprawling home, along with the lifeless body of their dog. In the immediate wake of the discovery, medical authorities confirmed a profoundly troubling sequence of events. Betsy had died approximately a full week before Gene. Her official cause of death was recorded as a severe, uncommon viral infection. His was recorded as catastrophic heart failure, with contributing factors tied to his advanced age. On the official paperwork, the case was swiftly and discreetly closed, yet the physical reality of what officers found inside that house bore little resemblance to the tidy paperwork being fed to the press. Consider for a moment the genuinely terrifying weight of what that timeline implies. From the very first day of the investigation, the Santa Fe Sheriff's Department publicly maintained that there were absolutely no indications of foul play, standard, soothing language engineered to bury a sensational story before it could take root in the media cycle. But within that very same official statement, authorities openly conceded that the scene inside the house was suspicious enough to warrant an extensive, full-scale forensic sweep of the entire property. Those two positions cannot coexist. A scene with zero evidence of foul play does not simultaneously justify quietly deploying federal tactical teams armed with advanced thermal imaging technology and elite forensic specialists. These contradictory claims belong to entirely different realities, and the official version of events leaves behind enormous, glaring questions that no one in government has come anywhere close to answering. The medical examiner confirmed that Betsy died a full 7 days before her husband. This means Gene Hackman, a frail 95-year-old with heart issues, lived with his wife's body for an entire week without contacting authorities. Whether driven by fear, duty, or the knowledge that outsiders would discover what lay beneath the floorboards, his silence was absolute. If verified, this event becomes one of the most deeply disturbing, paradigm-shifting discoveries tied to a celebrity death in modern American history. To truly understand what the FBI walked into when they finally went underground, you first have to clearly understand exactly what sat above it. The estate was a hardened installation featuring stone walls, motion sensors, and thermal surveillance rivaling government black sites. Staff were bound by such punitive NDAs that no leaks occurred over decades. Property records were redacted or missing, and a dedicated researcher abruptly abandoned her work after looking into the files, leaving no explanation as to who told her to quit looking. Here's what absolutely nobody was ready for when law enforcement finally stepped past those heavy steel gates and entered the home. The interior was a staggering display of masterpieces, antiques, and rare botanical specimens. Architectural historian Dr. Elena Vasquez noted the property was designed like a historic museum built inside a military compound. This combination of beauty and tactical countermeasures only exists when someone is actively, desperately protecting something very specific. And she was absolutely right. Body camera footage that was reluctantly released after a judge's incredibly rare public ruling shows the armed deputies cautiously entering the Hackman mansion. The suffocating silence inside the home is immediate and heavy. But what truly unsettled the seasoned federal agents wasn't the quiet of the dead. It was the glaring, undeniable physical evidence that someone else had been incredibly busy inside that house right before they arrived. Heavy antique furniture had been frantically dragged across the pristine hardwood floors, leaving deep, violent gouges in the wood. Hundreds of books had been hastily pulled from the library shelves and restacked in the wrong order. Heavy wooden drawers were left hanging ajar, their contents aggressively rifled through. A massive, heavy-duty bedroom safe was sitting wide open and completely empty. Someone, or perhaps a group of people, had been systematically tearing through this massive house, desperately searching for something specific, or perhaps frantically trying to hide it before the police breached the gates. And then, the federal agents walked into the private library. Hidden entirely behind a solid section of the wall in Hackman's private, sprawling library was a mechanism concealed so incredibly precisely that you could stand inside that room 1,000 times, stare directly at the wall, and never once notice it. When the federal agents finally found the hidden trigger, they realized it wasn't a cliché, hollow bookcase on a squeaky hinge. It wasn't a simple, mechanical latch hidden behind an oil painting. This was a highly advanced, heavily engineered entry point requiring a very specific, multi-step activation sequence to open. Whoever originally built this door wanted it to be completely invisible to anyone who didn't already know exactly how to trigger it. When the heavy wall finally shifted and hissed open, it revealed a narrow, suffocating passageway. Steep, rough-hewn stone steps descended directly down into total, consuming blackness. There was absolutely no internal light source. There was no modern ventilation system. It was just a carved stone throat dropping straight down into the cold earth. The heavily armed agents slowly went down. The ambient temperature violently dropped with every single step they took into the dark. The air became incredibly thick, damp, and overwhelmingly metallic, actively carrying the distinct, unsettling taste of ancient rust on the tongue. Thick condensation clung to the rough walls like sweat. As their high-powered flashlight beams swept aggressively across the ancient stone, the light suddenly landed on something that stopped the lead federal agent mid-step. This is where the physical evidence of the Hackman estate crosses the line into something entirely unexplainable. The deep subterranean walls were completely covered in deliberate, complex markings. This was absolutely not random vandalism or graffiti, and it was certainly not interior decoration. These were incredibly precise, deeply grooved inscriptions carved directly into the solid rock with heavy tools and absolute mathematical intention. Some of the sprawling symbols strongly resembled ancient alchemical notation. Other sections of the wall looked exactly like highly complex technical blueprints for mechanical devices that simply should not have existed in whatever historical era this deep tunnel was originally constructed. One massive section of the stone wall featured what appeared to be a flawless, detailed schematic for a massive machine with absolutely no modern technological equivalent. It depicted interlocking gears, strange pressurized chambers, and complex energy conduits arranged in bizarre configurations that one baffled forensic technician later described on the record as engineering from nowhere. The physical construction of the tunnel, itself also told a deeply terrifying, chronological story. Near the top of the stairs, right by the library entrance, the stonework was clearly mid-20th century. It featured clean industrial cuts, modern material, and heavy poured concrete reinforcement. But the deeper the federal agents descended into the earth, the rougher and more ancient the walls became. The concrete gave way to hand-carved joints, primitive structural reinforcement, and deep tool marks clearly made from a heavy pick and iron chisel, not modern power tools. Marcus Devlin, a highly experienced structural engineer who was asked to review the leaked classified photographs of the passage interior, studied the images in absolute silence for a long time before finally setting them down on his desk. He stated slowly and firmly that this tunnel was absolutely not built by the homeowner. He noted that the upper section had clearly been renovated, modernized, and heavily reinforced in recent decades. But the deep, ancient core of this tunnel was already sitting there waiting in the dark. Gene Hackman didn't dig it. He simply moved into it. He inherited it. When the agents finally reached the bottom of the long, freezing descent, they stepped into the main chamber. This vast underground space appeared frozen in time, filled with ancient crates containing decaying documents, rusted objects, and artifacts from no identifiable era. One box held black and white photographs of unknown faces in clandestine meetings and brutalist structures absent from public records. A 1937 image showed men gathered around maps with a cryptic word written in a language that top linguistic experts have still not been able to identify. Nearby were leather-bound files detailing global events erased from history, some bearing insignias of defunct Black Ops groups. The chamber floor was carved with intricate celestial maps and precise star charts. These astronomical alignments and planetary paths required advanced mathematical knowledge, suggesting the chamber served as a permanent mark for someone who would eventually come later. Forensic teams also recovered tools with unknown engravings and internal mechanisms far too precise for their era. One seamless metal cylinder defied modern metallurgical techniques. Retired FBI analyst Dr. Sewer James Whitfield noted that the government's suffocating silence suggests they found something paradigm-shifting. As the silence surrounding the Hackman estate absolutely does not look like embarrassment. To understand why this is happening here, you have to look at the ground beneath Santa Fe itself. The estate sits near Los Alamos, where rumors of massive military bunkers have persisted for decades. While some Cold War construction is confirmed, its full extent remains classified. Former DLE consultant Richard Payne confirmed that massive interconnected systems run deep under these mesas, some decommissioned, others simply forgotten and quietly disconnected from every single official government record. Here is the specific, chilling detail from the Hackman estate that changes absolutely everything about this investigation. The heavy, rusted steel found inside that secret tunnel was officially identified as military grade. The exact spacing of the heavy iron rivets and the structural supports perfectly matched the highly classified construction techniques used to build high-security government installations in the 1950s. A wealthy celebrity's private wine cellar absolutely does not get built like a subterranean bank vault. A simple, eccentric storage room does not get heavily sealed from the inside, but a forgotten, disconnected spur of a highly classified, sprawling government underground network. That terrifying possibility changes the entire scale of what the FBI is actually dealing with. The wealthy neighbors living adjacent to the Hackman compound always felt that something was deeply wrong with the property. Margaret Calloway heard heavy industrial vibrations at night that rattled her bones. When she mentioned it to Hackman, he ominously replied, "Some things are better left below the surface." Geologist Frank Delqua confirmed these were rhythmic, mechanical readings on an automated schedule, though his formal complaints were ignored. Neighbors also witnessed unmarked trucks arriving under the cover of darkness, while former staff members frequently vanished from the public record after reportedly seeing things they weren't supposed to see. And then there is the communication system. Investigators found a secondary analog ghost line hardwired into the walls, connecting the mansion directly to the underground chamber. This functional, archaic system was entirely off the grid, allowing for communication that could not be monitored or intercepted by the outside world. The terrifying question remains, exactly who was on the other end of that ringing phone? Here is what the public often forgets about the man who actually built this terrifying silence. Before his isolation, Gene Hackman was known as a warm, grounded presence who engaged authentically with his Santa Fe community. From his barber to local librarians, everyone remembered him as an intensely curious and social man, someone absolutely not naturally built for bitter isolation. Stop and truly think about what that psychological profile actually means for this mystery. A social man only builds a paranoid fortress with 24-hour surveillance and ironclad NDAs if something terrifying forces his hand. His cinematic career, defined by roles as men trapped in conspiracies or surveillance experts who knew too much, suggests that looking at the iron door beneath his house, it is entirely possible that he was never just acting. The official, sterile government story is that Gene Hackman simply died of heart failure at the age of 95. From a medical standpoint, that is entirely plausible. But a death certificate absolutely does not explain why an incredibly wealthy couple who possessed unlimited access to the absolute finest, most exclusive healthcare in the world actively chose to isolate themselves completely and utterly in their final dying days. There were absolutely no frantic calls to a private doctor. There were no emergency contacts notified. There was absolutely no medical staff allowed on the premises to help his dying wife. The massive external alarm system surrounding the compound was still highly active when the FBI arrived, but the internal security cameras inside the mansion had all been manually, deliberately disabled from the main control panel. Two people sat completely alone inside a multi-million-dollar fortress, slowly dying in absolute silence, while something heavily sealed 40 feet beneath their floorboards held its breath. Here is the one specific detail that absolutely haunts every single federal investigator who has touched this classified case. The heavy engineered tunnel entrance hidden inside the private library was absolutely not sealed shut when the agents originally found it. The complex hidden mechanism had been manually activated very recently. Gene Hackman, a frail man in his mid-90s whose heart was actively failing, had physically walked down into that freezing, damp, terrifying passage not long before his heart finally stopped. Why? What was he desperately checking on in his final hours? What was he so deeply afraid of? Or, and this is the terrifying question that absolutely no one in the government wants to ask out loud, was he desperately hiding in the dark from something he knew had finally breached his walls and found him? Deep in the absolute far wall of the underground chamber, sitting silently past the rotting wooden crates, past the scattered, erased historical files, and past the massive, complex star charts violently carved into the stone floor. The federal agents sweeping flashlights finally found it. It was a massive, heavy iron door set immovably into the solid bedrock. There was absolutely no handle on the outside of the door. There were no visible iron hinges to be unscrewed. It was just a massive, deeply corroded steel surface featuring thick, heavy weld marks running entirely along every single seam. It had been permanently, violently sealed from the inside by someone who absolutely never came back out. The heavy lock on that iron door was absolutely not designed to keep curious people from getting in. The lock was specifically, undeniably designed to keep something terrifying from getting out. Here is what absolutely nobody noticed until it was far too late to ask Gene Hackman the truth about his property. The FBI said absolutely nothing publicly about what currently lies beyond that welded iron door. There has been no official press comment, no anonymous leak to a friendly reporter, and absolutely no background briefing given to the media. In a modern, highly connected era where highly classified Pentagon documents routinely end up leaked on social media platforms within hours, that absolute, unbroken level of total containment requires massive, active, aggressive government suppression. And that suffocating silence tells you infinitely more than any sanitized press conference ever could. Highly specialized FBI forensic teams are allegedly still down there in the dark today, meticulously analyzing every single bizarre artifact, scanning every single redacted document, and photographing every single alchemical symbol carved on those damp walls. They have brought in experts to find trace DNA. They have tasked supercomputers with the cryptographic decoding of the bizarre inscriptions left by hands that have been dead for generations. They have secretly flown in elite linguists, advanced metallurgists, leading historians of pre-industrial engineering, and brilliant astronomers specifically tasked with interpreting the massive star maps carved into the chamber floor. Many months have officially passed since the initial shocking discovery of the tunnel. In any normal high-profile investigation, details eventually leak. Yet this case remains under total lockdown. This suggests that the contents of the underground chamber are not merely historical, but actively, operationally sensitive. A threat that requires military containment today, It implies that beneath our normal world are heavy iron doors that were never meant to be opened. Gene Hackman quietly guarded one of those doors for decades, engineering a paranoid life of surveillance and isolation to ensure no one found what waited beneath his floor. He carried this crushing weight from the peak of his career until his final hours, and now he is completely gone, the absolute last person on Earth who knew every single dark corridor of that tunnel, who knew the contents of every crate in that chamber, and who understood every single mark on those stone walls, is gone forever. Whatever is currently waiting behind that heavily welded iron barrier, sitting quietly 40 feet below his ransacked library, is no longer his burden to protect. The ultimate question isn't whether the FBI currently knows what is down there in the dark. They absolutely do. The real, terrifying question is, what could possibly be so dangerous, so fundamentally, reality-altering and destabilizing, so incredibly threatening to absolutely everything we think we know about our world, that the United States government would rather say absolutely nothing than tell the public what they found behind that door? Was the beloved Gene Hackman simply the last tragic guardian of something terrifying that was buried long before he was ever born? Or, in his final desperate hours, was he actually its final prisoner?